The following program presents principles designed to promote good health and is not intended to take the place of personalized professional care. The opinions and ideas expressed are those of the speaker. Viewers are encouraged to draw their own conclusions about the information presented.
Hello and welcome to Health for a Lifetime. I'm your host, Don McIntosh. We're glad that you joined us today. We're going to be talking about a very important subject today, and that is addictions. We're going to get some definitions about what that means, and we're delighted today to have Vicki Griffin with us. She's from the Michigan Conference, and she also has a lot of education in different areas, focusing on nutrition. She is the author of many books and a lot of resources under the name of Lifestyle Matters Health Intervention Series. And when you talk about what Vicki Griffin has done, it's really quite amazing, and we're thankful that she can be here. We're glad you're here today.
Thank you, Don.
Now, a lot of the things we talk about today can be accessed, you know, when we talk about them more fully, or people want to look at more fully on your website, lifestylematters.com. I understand that. And the new book that you've written that we're talking about today is Living Free, Finding Freedoms from Habits That Hurt. So we're talking about addictions, isn't that right?
That's absolutely right.
Now, let's talk about habits. How is a habit formed, and what is the difference between, you know, a good habit and a bad one?
Well, habits are automatic behaviors, and the characteristics of a good habit, when someone learns how to do a behavior automatically, it takes some effort, it takes concentration, it takes motivation. But as we learn those new behaviors, what we have learned and put conscious effort into is now pushed down to what is called the subcortical level, and that makes the behavior automatic. For instance, a pilot who goes through hours and hours of training, now his responses are automatic, and that's a good thing. And habits are very good. Elbert Hubbard said that habit is the great economizer of energy.
So this is good habits.
Good habits.
It's good to be able to just know how to do things just routinely.
Yes, and there are many reasons why. These good habits that we develop throughout life and our brains are designed to develop help us to repeat safe and effective behavior and perform multiple tasks with very little effort. You don't have to think about it too much. To increase the task speed and accuracy, we can actually become better at the things we do automatically. It also frees mental resources for challenges and change. It just frees up hard drive space so that you can pay attention to other things. And it also builds security and consistency into our lives. These routines are good, but routines can become ruts. And when habits turn bad, the exact opposite is happening. You're actually losing the ability to pay attention to other things. It's called runaway motivation, where you are now focusing more and more on that one thing to the exclusion of other necessary functions and priorities in life, so that you are actually losing the ability to learn other things, losing the ability to deal with challenges, losing the ability to focus on the other priorities.
So habits are good. You get in this routine, you take care of the kids, you take out the trash, you do all these different things. But then when you get some kind of runaway motivation, it kind of messes up all those positive habit patterns, and you have what maybe is, well, let's see, is this what an addiction is, when a runaway motivation
That's
comes?
what it's been called, and the traditional classical definition of addiction is the compulsive need for and use of a habit-forming substance characterized by drug tolerance and withdrawal. However, we know that people can be addicted to things besides substances and drugs.
So like, you know, pasta.
Yes, I think some people are addicted to pasta.
So the definition of an addiction, then, it is a compulsive need, which means you just have to have it, I suppose.
Well, according to Howard Schaefer from the Division of Addiction at Harvard University and others, but his statement, I think, reflects what the growing consensus is.
I think you have that too, or we'll look at it.
Yeah, drug use is not a necessary and sufficient cause of addiction. He says it is improper to consider drugs as the necessary precondition for addiction. So the newer expanded understanding of what addiction encompasses includes the persistent compulsive behavior that is harmful or destructive, characterized by an inability to stop.
So it doesn't necessarily just have to be drugs. It can be, but it's just this, you have to do it kind of thing.
The body becomes addicted to its own opioids. People can become habituated to pornography, gambling, internet.
And I suppose these are all things that would stimulate opiate production in the brain or dopamine production in the brain.
Both, absolutely. And there are other things going on. Addictions are actually learned. There are other neurotransmitters besides dopamine involved in the development of addiction. And I like what Howard Schaefer has had to say about this. He's from the Division of Addiction at Harvard University. He says a lot of addiction is the result of experience. Repetitive, high emotion, high frequency experience.
So what you're saying is it's just you keep doing something again and again and again, and then your brain chemistry kind of organizes around that. Can you actually see structural changes in the brain?
There's no question that structural changes take place in the brain according to what we choose to pay attention to over and over and over again. I like the way Stephen Grant states it. He's from the National Institute on Drug Abuse. He says, what is coming up fast as being the core issue is continued engagement in self-destructive behavior despite adverse consequences.
So why do you like that quote? Because it talks about again, the repetitive nature of things, and that's the core issue, just doing it again and again.
It confirms with what many people intuitively already understand. If a person intellectually knows that what they're involved in is too much and they can't seem to break away from it, they're in bondage to this thing, they're slaves to this thing. There are very real changes that have taken place in the brain as a result of that, not only at the metabolic and physiologic level, but at the genetic level. There are changes that take place. And in a funny kind of way, that's great news, because what we learn, we can unlearn. And the brain is very, very responsive to the choices that we make, and that's a good thing.
So even shopping, you say here, is something that can be addictive. Have they studied and seen the brain organizing around the mall?
Well, yes, you've seen those bumper stickers, shop until you drop, but actually the most potent reinforcers are food and sex. And according to Mark Gold from the McKnight Brain Institute at the University of Florida, he said, what is the difference between someone who's lost control over alcohol and someone who's lost control over good food? When you look at their brains and their brain responses, the differences are not very significant.
So food, you know, the sexual responses, all that, it's triggering the same places in the brain. And when you see someone that is addicted to maybe a substance or addicted to food or addicted to pornography, it's the same area of the brain that's being changed.
That's exactly right. And the changes that take place are just as real and just as significant as changes that take place with substances, although there are degrees of damage that are done with substances that are, of course, not the same as with some of the natural rewards.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard someone say that if we have a victory or are able to handle food in our lives, then a lot of other things are easily handled as well. And this certainly seems to speak to that same concept.
Absolutely, and we're going to be doing a program together on food addiction, and it is actually very much more complex than drug addiction in many respects, because there are changes taking place in other systems that are equally challenging. And so what we want to develop are strategies for long-term success. But many people do not realize that they are struggling with an addiction. There is a rationalization that goes on. There's a failure to see patterns in the life. So there are signs that the brain is addicted. There are some very typical.
So, I mean, you know, when we look at this, you know, you can see those real signs. But, you know, it's kind of hard to admit that you're addicted. You know, I've sat in AA meetings and others where it just is really hard for someone to admit that they're powerless, that they need help, and put themselves to be, you know, if you will, the patient instead of being in control.
Well, and especially when you consider that when these sort of patterns develop, often it's an attempt to gain control in the life. It's an attempt to gain control of the emotions. It's an attempt to gain control of the mood or the environment or some of these.
So what are some of the signs, excuse me, what are some of the signs of an addicted brain? How can you tell maybe your relative, your husband, your wife, your children? What are you looking at to see in terms of signs of addiction?
There are 10 standard well-known signs that the brain is getting into trouble, and one of the premier ones is you're spending a lot of time with this thing. You're spending more time than you plan. You have repeated failure to reduce time with it, whatever it is, lying, sneaking, and hiding regarding it, hoarding, inability to enjoy other pleasures. It's something called anhedonia. You just lose the...
Anhedonia?
Yeah, you just lose the ability to enjoy people, things, other events in life. You obsess and plan and hoard it. Underlying depression and anxiety is a really key factor in the development of compulsive behavior. The work and family deteriorate because of this thing. You give up useful activities for it. People spend all night on the internet compulsively, day after day, week after week, and they just can't seem to get away with it from it. Studies have shown that even with television, it can become compulsive. The use of television can become compulsive. And withdrawal signs when usage stops. That's another one.
So all of these different things, if any of those signs have shown up, you need to be concerned that maybe you or your relative are becoming addicted to this.
Yes, your involvement in whatever it is becoming compulsive, it's becoming destructive, it is creating the opposite of the effect that you are seeking, and now you are doing this thing not in order to feel good, you're doing it in order to keep from feeling bad. Even the pleasure of the activity itself is now gone.
So talk to me then about genetics, environment, and the choice that plays a part of this.
Well, we know that a person can be genetically prone to heart disease or diabetes or depression. A person can be genetically prone to addictions as well. Those with a family history of alcoholism, drug abuse, eating disorders, depression, they are at risk. And we also know that those who come from an environment where there's been neglect or abuse, that they are at higher risk. And then our own behavioral choices can also pull us into a trap because of the reinforcing property of what we're engaged in. You can take perfectly healthy, happy lab rats from good homes, and they can become addicted to substances and to different behaviors. So there are the three aspects. Now, the thing that we need to remember, though, and I'm really thankful for this, is that association is not causality. In other words, genetics, environment, and behavioral choices don't cause addictions. They're just associated with a higher risk.
So you're not doomed to do the same thing just because your parents did it or others did it, and that's not even a good excuse. You know, the title of your book has hope in it.
That's
right.
It's
talking about addictions and how to break free from
those.
That's right. I know that's on your website. It's a great website, lifestylematters.com, and you have information about that book there. But you know, I want to shift maybe now from the problem to the solution. Is there hope? We want to talk about this in the second half, but set us up. Is there hope? Is there a reason to come back?
There is so much exciting new information out there. There's so much hope. God has designed our brains for recovery, renewal, and restoration.
We're talking with Vicki Griffin. We're talking about addictions. A lot of people have addiction. A lot of people have positive habits, but then also negative addictions that sometimes develop. We've talked about that. We're going to come back and talk about what can be done to address those problems. Join us when we come back.
Are you confused about the endless stream of new and often contradictory health information? With companies trying to sell new drugs and special interest groups paying for studies that spin the facts, where can you find a common-sense approach to health? One way is to ask for your free copy of Dr. Arnott's 24 Realistic Ways to Improve Your Health. Dr. Timothy Arnott and the Lifestyle Center of America produced this helpful booklet of 24 short, practical health tips based on scientific research and the Bible that will help you live longer, happier, and healthier. For example, did you know that women who drink more water lower the risk of a heart attack? or that 7 to 8 hours of sleep a night can minimize your risk of ever developing diabetes. Find out how to lower your blood pressure and much more. If you're looking for help, not hype, then this booklet's for you. Just log on to 3abn.org and click on free offers or call us during regular business hours. You'll be glad you did.
Welcome back. We've been talking with Vicki Griffin. We've been talking about addictions. We've talked about the problems. We've talked about how people can have positive habits, but then they can be drawn into these addictive behaviors. Pornography, food, shopping, drugs, all these things impact the same area of the brain. And we've got good news. You know, before we talk about this good news, I know that you have a website, lifestylematters.com, an excellent website, all kinds of resources there for food addictions, and then this new book that you have written, Living Free, Finding Freedom from Habits. And it's just a great resource. I want to just thank you for putting that together.
Well, thank you. We've written it with 2 addiction specialists and a dietitian, and so we have a really great team that has come together collaboratively with their experience and their expertise, and we believe that we've got some good materials.
I mean, in a program like this, we can only kind of scratch the surface.
Right.
We can give some high points, but there really is a process, as I look at your book, that really leads people through, you know, number one, identifying the addictions and all those different things,
Right.
and then what to do to get out of those.
Well, here's the thing. People know how to do their addiction, and they know how to stop, but it's everything in between that sort of falls through the cracks.
Okay. So I think there's additional information there, lifestylematters.com, and this can really help people. This is only a springboard.
Right.
Once the brain is locked into a pattern, is it possible to break free? That's the big question and people are asking.
Yes, and this is the thrilling part. This is what motivates me to do these kinds of programs, because our brains were designed by our Creator to be resilient. There's a lot of redundancy built into the brain.
What's that mean, redundancy?
Well, resiliency means the capacity to bounce back. Redundancy means there's a lot of compensatory mechanisms in the brain to compensate for the problems that we may have created by our choices or by whatever situation that we have cultivated in our lives. And so there's a lot of ability of the brain to grow, to recover, to renovate, and to renew. And I really love the way neuroscience is validating what the Bible has said about having a new mind. They don't understand the spiritual part about how Christ comes, God comes, and He gives us a new will and a new desire. But the Lord does even more for us. He gives us more than just the power, the will, and the desire. He also gives us a plan, and it's that very plan that neuroscience is honing in on and seeing. And I just want to quote Dr. John Rady from Harvard University. He's a neuropsychiatrist who wrote a fascinating little book called A User's Guide to the Brain. And he says, the adult brain is both plastic and resilient and always eager to learn. Now, plastic doesn't mean like hard plastic, but plastic in the sense of malleable. It's very responsive to our choices, and new choices do make a new you. And he says this, we always have the ability to remodel our brains. This is why we can learn in the first place and unlearn too. Changing your pattern of thinking changes the brain's structure.
So it's by the way you think, that's what you are. As a man thinketh, so is he.
It is a principle, and that principle can be turned into a process in our lives. And other scientists have stated it in different ways. William James, I like the way he puts it. He's a famous psychologist. He says attention. And remember, we talked about runaway motivation, and the brain learns according to what we pay attention to. And it says attention is a mental state that allows us, moment by moment, to choose and sculpt how our ever-changing minds will work, to choose who we will be for the next moment in a very real sense. And those choices are left embossed in physical form on our material selves.
So we can change. Now, that sounds very promising, but it also, for the person that is in the midst of addiction and in the midst of, whatever it is, to just say to them, well, you can think differently, is like, wait a minute, you don't understand all of these things, the emotion and everything that's involved in this. What do you say to someone that is responding to this that way?
Well, what they're saying is true, because once a person has developed an addiction, changes have taken place in multiple circuits of the brain. Circuits that are involved with motivation and drive, memory, compulsion, stress, learning, self-control, mood, all of these things are affected. And so what we want to understand is how to enter into a process that will build a bridge back to the power of initiation of self-will, choice, motivated choices that we can initiate in a self-determined way. And there's a process of getting there.
So let's look at that process. I mean, kind of map it out. What are the practical steps involved in remapping that? And I know, again, the best thing is to look more fully at your book and whatnot,
right.
But let's give a framework here.
Well, just briefly, there are some very practical steps, not only to implement the power of God in our lives. People become disappointed. They say, I want God's power. They claim God's power, but then they don't understand the process of long-term change. Staying with the program. It's like Jackie Gleason said. He said the second day of a diet is always the best because by then you're through with it. I mean, so it's one thing to have the power to stop doing something, but it's another thing to learn new behaviors, new choices, new responses, and new motivation. And that is part of God's plan, and He's given us a process by which we can do that. And so His purpose then can be fulfilled in our lives on a long term. And part of that has to do with creating an environment. Creating an environment means your internal, and we're going to talk about this probably on some future programs, but creating an internal attitude. The way that I choose to think about a thing has a powerful sculpting effect on the brain. The external environment are my immediate surroundings. It has to do with removing triggers, and it has to do with changing the way I think about the triggers that I cannot remove in my life. So there's this very first step of the environment, and
so treatment programs.
Treatment programs
is that creating an environment?
An environment. God has many ways to help His children. That may involve some medication. It may involve certain types of support groups, treatment programs, interventions. That's all part of that program.
So God took people out of Egypt. He took them to the wilderness. That was a treatment program.
It was a treatment program, no question
okay,
about it.
Internal and external.
Internal and external environment. And I love also the way Dr. Rady from Harvard says. He says experiences, thoughts, actions, and emotions actually change the structure of the brain. That's really encouraging for people to know. And it says by viewing the brain as a muscle that can be weakened or strengthened, then we can exercise our ability to determine who we become. We need to build a bridge to that place where we can exercise those choices.
And that happens within the right environment internally. That's our thoughts. And then externally as well, being in a supported area.
Well, there's another layer to that, and that is creating a lifestyle. Now, a lifestyle is not restrictive. The lifestyle that God has given us is not just restrictive, it is protective. It actually protects and motivates us. It surrounds us, it keeps us safe, it keeps us in a direction by helping us and encouraging us to choose a certain way. And nutritionally, when we get proper nutrition, it's going to lower stress and depression levels. When you get your sleep, when you get your exercise, it will elevate mood, control stress hormone production. So there are physiological responses to positive lifestyle changes that are very protective against addictions.
So you say here, to create an environment, but really there's already been an environment created that's optimal for us. Is discovering what that is.
Right. What is protective against addiction also helps maintain long-term success. So there are steps. There's the internal attitude, there's the external environment of what we're going to surround ourselves with, but then there's the lifestyle. Layered on top of that, the Lord has given us community. It is our responsibility to create and get involved with community. You mentioned support, but it's about more than support, because being involved in social networks that are positive, role modeling off from people that have learned how to solve problems in a positive way, who know how to meet obstacles and challenges in a good way, taking classes, learning new hobbies, getting involved in social interactions, church group, volunteering. Not only does it create support, but it also creates an environment of responsibility and accountability, and we need.
And you call
all
that
of
community.
That is community. And when you enhance your community intellectually and socially, it also increases the neuronal networks in the brain, which actually will buffer the brain against depression and anxiety, and it also enhances the ability to meet challenges, because that is the big problem with addiction, the inability to meet challenges.
And you're all many times isolated. So an environment, a lifestyle, a community, and then you say create a connection.
That's right. The spiritual connection, of course, for me is the most important part. I've struggled for many years with bulimia and had involvement with drugs and all of those kinds of things. And so that I know for myself that giving up control is a main feature of victory, of long-term success. And that means that you give control of your life to God, who is able to superintend your experiences. And you no longer look at obstacles and challenges as threats to your survival. You now look at them as opportunities to gain more strength and to gain more resiliency and to learn and to balance out your mind and your character. You look at them as good, positive things because you believe in a beneficent Father in heaven who will help you to reinterpret your past, will help you to reinterpret what has happened to you in your life in a new and significant way that makes you strong instead of weak.
So you're coming from in writing this book along with this team, you're coming with your own personal testimony, and you know that this works, that God can help you create a new internal and external environment that can help you create community and all of these different things in a connection. Are there any special texts or special spiritual nuggets that have really helped you on your journey?
Oh, there are so many. And I always think of Mencius, the Chinese sage. He said that knowledge imparts information, but not the power to execute. So we need the power to execute what we know intellectually, but we also need God's plan. He changes our will and our desire, but He also has a plan that He wants for us to follow. And I love Philippians 2:13. It says, "For it is God Himself whose power creates within you the desire to do His gracious will and brings about the accomplishment of the desire."
So he creates it in you, and then He carries it through if you don't get in the way.
We have to not only not get in the way, we have to shoulder our own part of the work. We have to get involved and engaged in the process. It's the journey that gives strength. We always want beginnings and ends, but it's actually what happens in the middle that builds the strength that you need for your journey.
By the way, people are responding very well to this material your team has created at lifestylematters.com. And I'm just really enthused about that. I really want to thank you for coming and spending this time with us talking about this new book. And we look forward to talking more with you. And we look forward to talking more with you on Health for a Lifetime. We hope that today, as a result of what you've learned, you can break free and have the life God has intended for you and for those that you love.